Okay, so so far I can only see you, Millicent. If you want to try to get me on the screen, and I'll begin our little program here.
Andy, your screen is, I'm recording on my laptop and you're front and center, really a big picture of you. So,
Okay, all right.
yeah,
Am I still a
everybody
big
else who
picture
wants
now?
to see Andy's face large, you just can go to change your view from gallery. But the one that's getting recorded, Andy, is the one that's on my computer, and that has you as the speaker.
Fantastic, fantastic. So I'm looking at the whole array, which is nice because I feel like I'm talking to all of you. Okay, good evening. My name is Andy Davis. I'm broadcasting here from West Street, which is Swedeville, an old neighborhood in Brattleboro, and I'm in District 3. And I've been a member of the Brattleboro community since the 1980s, and I've been a member of our unique representative town meeting since 2009. And I currently am a member of the RTM steering committee, which will be a topic of discussion at RTM this year. The steering committee's mission was to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of RTM and to, quote, talk about procedure and how we can all do this job better. The training today is in line with that mission. Robert's Rules of Order share that same mission to enable groups of people to make decisions fairly and efficiently with a predictable set of procedures. Robert's Rules of Order support majority rule while allowing all sides of an issue to be heard. And we will see a bit later that rules alone cannot accomplish this. I am not a professional parliamentarian. Such folks actually exist. But I am a member of RTM, and my training today is from this point of view, and any feedback you provide me will be appreciated. The primary goals of Robert's Rules are decision making, efficiency, fairness, legitimacy, enabling a record of deliberations and decisions that can be reviewed. You might say majority rule while hearing all points of view in a fair environment. That's about as small as I can boil it down. Robert's rules are a tool or a mechanism for enabling the people to conduct their own affairs. These rules, sometimes called parliamentary rules, come in many different varieties. Different legislatures use different versions, but Robert's Rules is probably the most widely used by groups like ours, and of varying sizes as well. Knowledge of parliamentary law or rules at its core is used to help, not hinder, business. These rules were first published in 1876 by Henry Martin Robert, and the first edition was only 176 pages, and over the years the book has grown considerably. You can actually pick this up at everyone's books, and it's the whole banana. And it's thick and it's detailed. But we don't use all of this. No group uses all of this. So this is really just a reference manual, but it's not what you need to master. I also recommend, it's not Robert's Rules, but it's Robert's Rules in brief, and it's less than $10, and it is very, very practical in its orientation. So if you want to go a little deeper than this training, I would recommend this as your next step. But it's not necessary. I attended RTM for years without really, learning by doing. But I think it's very good, and I hope there's some folks here who maybe are just recently elected to our RTM. They've grown over the years. A friend of mine calls these Bob's rules, and I like this because it kind of humanizes these rules, brings them down to earth. And one thing we can always ask, sometimes people are critical of these rules, but imagine a meeting without rules. I actually don't want to imagine that very long. My job here tonight is fourfold. One, to demystify these rules by reviewing their purpose and their design. Two, to show that our own RTM uses a very digestible portion of Robert's rules. I want to show also that there are other necessary components of a good meeting besides these rules. If we think of the rules as bricks, there's also mortar that needs to be considered in building a good deliberative and decision-making event. We'll talk about what those are toward the end of the meeting. And finally, perhaps intrigue you enough to get you to dig deeper into being part of our local democracy here in Brattleboro. It's a unique system. We're the only town in Vermont with a representative form of town meeting. A number of town reps who completed our steering committee survey this year expressed some frustration with Robert's rules, seeing these procedures as complex, time-consuming, distracting, or confusing, and even maybe something that one group can manipulate to their advantage. It's worth noting that we have had 2 years of Zoom RTMs, electronic versions of this meeting, and we're about to have a third one. This has been a challenge for our deliberative community. It's been several years since there was training in Robert's Rules. It was a regular feature back a few years before COVID, and it's time that we got back into that habit. So I hope this will be used. I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I want to start with, I hope, an interesting story. I shared this back in January and got some good feedback on it. Many years ago, the father of an elderly friend of mine stood up at town meeting in his small New England town, and he said, "I move that the town hire a second road agent." To which the moderator of the meeting said, "It has been moved that the town should hire a second road agent. Is there a second?" Dead quiet filled the room. The moderator said, "As I hear no second, we will move on to the next order of business." And that was that. No second. Well, the roads did not improve. Mud season was as brutal as ever. And the following year, my friend's father again was recognized by the moderator and said, "I move that the town hire a second road agent." To which the moderator of the meeting said, "It has been moved that the town hire a second road agent. Is there a second?" Dead quiet again filled the room. Then, to everyone's surprise, came from somewhere, "Second." Everyone was a bit surprised, and the moderator said, "It has been moved and seconded that the town hire an additional road agent. Would you like to speak to your motion?" My friend's father spoke of the poor condition of the roads and described the immense task facing a single road agent, and then he sat down. The moderator continued, "Is there further discussion on the motion? Shall the town hire a second road agent?" After a long period of silence, one of the august members of the community, who happened to be sitting next to the current and only road agent for the town, stood up and was recognized. He said, "I do believe that one road agent is bad enough," and sat down. After the laughter subsided, the matter was voted down and was not raised again in the following years. Well, without commenting on the wisdom of the town's decision, this story shows Robert's rules at their most basic. There's an issue, a need, a course of action related to the issue is put forth. At least one other member of the body believes the response is worth the discussion. Differing views are exchanged, a vote is taken, and a decision is made by the members of the body. Now let's look at the essential role of the moderator here. The moderator is not a chairperson, as they are on many committees that may use Robert's rules. But in RTM, our moderator is not a chairperson. They are a facilitator. They guide the meeting through the agreed upon procedure. The moderator does not join in the discussion, does not represent their own opinion or that of any other group or individual. Their job is to find the will and the intention of the body. The moderator determines if there's a quorum present and then calls the meeting to order. There may be traditional activities at the outset of the meeting before the business portion begins. Often these activities help set the tone of the meeting. All discussion is directed through the moderator, and this is really true at our RTM. This is an important component of Robert's Rules. It keeps the focus on the issues and not on the personalities. Instead of somebody saying, "Can Doris just tell us how many times the committee has even met?" I can just hear people bristling. Instead, it's proper to ask the moderator, "Please inquire of the committee chair how many times they've met this year." It may seem overly formal, especially in a small meeting, but in practice, it shows respect and lessens the chance of individuals taking offense. Issues over personalities. The moderator, and we have been very fortunate in Brattleboro in my time of having moderators, I've known a couple of them at town meeting, who have embodied fairness, attention, and patience throughout the meeting. And I have no reason to believe that that tradition in Brattleboro will not continue. Now I'm going to put up take a moment here to do a visual here. And I'm going to share my screen. For a moment, you'll see what a disorganized, all right, there we go. These were my 4 goals. I meant to put this up earlier, but just to review, I'm going to try to demystify these rules for you tonight, show that we use a very digestible portion, show that there are other ingredients to a good meeting that we have followed here in Brattleboro, and finally, to interest you to be more participatory in our local democracy. Now, let me move on to the visual at hand. Okay. Now, it's important to note that representative town meeting in Brattleboro is not run solely by Robert's Rules. It is guided by both Vermont state law and the Brattleboro Town Charter. These things take precedence over anything that we might find in Robert's Rules. Robert's Rules is the default set of parliamentary rules in Vermont, and a town can adopt a different set of rules if they choose. In Vermont, the Select Board throughout the state is the legislative branch of governance. Each year, our Select Board puts forth articles that are to be considered at RTM. Some articles must, by law, be voted on by Australian ballot, and they are put forth on the ballot for voting day, which is our first Tuesday of March, which we've just had. The public announcement of these articles, any articles, is called the warning. Publicly placing them on the warning must be done no more than 40 days and no less than 30 days before RTM, the third Saturday after the first Tuesday. It's kind of like setting Easter or when to plant your peas. The warning is a guarantee that no business will take place unannounced. And that has some interesting ramifications, which we'll hear about soon. Articles, we use the term articles here in Vermont. In Robert's Rules, they're actions. They're usually referenced as motions or main motions. They are legally placed on the warning. Any article that's legally placed on the warning must be acted upon according to our town charter. We can't, in Robert's Rules, they allow you to set a motion aside and just say, we're not going to deal with it. Sometime in the future, we'll deal with it. If a article appears on the warning, and this is from last year's town report. This is the published articles for 2021. We have the same thing for 2022. These articles must be acted on according to town charter. They cannot be deferred indefinitely. They could possibly be deferred till later in the meeting, but they have to be acted upon by the end of the meeting. In addition, and this is really important, only articles that have been properly warned can have legally binding force. During other business, which is an integral part of our RTM, non-binding and advisory motions can be introduced and debated. They can be amended, passed, or defeated. However, if they're not on the warning, these motions are non-binding. There are people I know who believe that Robert's rules at RTM seems to prevent important topics from being discussed. However, if you want to get a topic discussed and you're obeying Vermont law and our Brattleboro Town Charter, you need to get an article or a motion on the warning. In Brattleboro, this can be done by the citizenry through petition, as detailed in the town charter, or can be done by working with the select board and getting a proposal put on there by the select board. Before we get into the decision-making procedure, which is the putting forth of motions and amendments and all that, we're going to take our first short break for questions if anyone has a question or a pertinent comment up to this point. So I'm going to end this screen share. And is there anyone, you can use the, under reactions at the bottom of your screen, if you have a question or comment, you can do the raise hand function. And we will make sure that you get called upon. If not, I'll assume that I explained everything so far. Anyone in the room there with you, Millicent? No, okay. I'm going to assume that all of you have absorbed that beautifully and have found no discrepancies with my presentation. That could be a dangerous assumption, but I'm going to continue. All right. Now, when the business portion of town meeting begins and we start working through the articles, Robert's rules can be followed almost like clockwork. I used to think when I first joined that it was almost like a bit of kabuki theater. And it may seem like a group of insiders are in control of the meeting, but they're actually simply following a procedure to efficiently make decisions that we must make. Although multiple readings of the motions or articles is time-consuming and has been commented on before as maybe, why do we take all this time to reread? Well, we've all been at meetings when someone asks a neighbor or something, or we hear somebody behind us say, what exactly are we voting on right now? The rereading of articles at hand reduces the chance that members are unsure of what is being discussed and what is being voted upon. It is good to keep a notepad or use the inside of your town report to take notes, and you can actually keep track of what's happening yourself. The most basic pattern of decision making was demonstrated in my story about the road agent. There's a motion. There is a second. Without that, there is nothing to discuss. Once there's a second, the motion is reread. Then the floor is open to discussion or debate. Then a rereading of the motion, the moderator might say, are you ready to vote? If there's no one who hasn't been called on who wants to add something to say, then voting takes place and a decision is announced. However, life is never that simple. What happens if someone wants to change the main motion, alter it in some way? What happens if the debate seems to go on too long and becomes circular or repetitive? What happens if someone questions the legality of an amendment? What happens if someone feels that a key piece of information that would help us is not before the body? What happens if someone feels the rules have been unfairly or incorrectly applied? What happens if someone is desperate for a short break? What happens if the moderator makes a decision and someone wants to question that decision and see if the body is in agreement with that decision? This is why Robert's Rules gets bigger over the years. This is not the complexity of Robert's Rules. This is the complexity of human affairs. The complexity of human affairs is why Robert's Rules have grown over the years. I'm going to put up another visual here that I think will be very helpful. We'll put this away. This just a review. We have Vermont state law, which we all must obey, Brattleboro Town Charter, Robert's Rules of Order as modified to conform to state law and town charter, and then these are some of the mortar that connects our bricks. Leadership of the meeting, our customs and traditions, civility toward one another, paying attention during the meeting, listening carefully to others, being prepared for the meeting, being aware of what's being on the warning, and taking your own notes. Okay, now let me move on to this process of amendments. All right, I'm indebted to Millicent Cooley, who's our co-host for tonight, and I want to thank her at this point for being so supportive of this process here. Millicent and I basically worked together with input from Lauren Crisp, our former moderator in town, to make sure that this is an accurate picture of what happens with amendments. And I'll just kind of talk you through it on here and make reference to the road agent example. Here is a main motion put forward. It might be one of the articles that's on our warning for our meeting later this month. It might be something during other business that is simply advisory in nature, but a main motion is put before the body. It's either read from the warning or it comes off the floor. If it is seconded, it's restated by the moderator and debate and discussion ensue. Out of that debate and discussion, somebody could put forward an amendment. If that amendment is not seconded, it doesn't go anywhere. If not, there's not another human being in the room that thinks it's worth our time to entertain that amendment. It simply ends and we go right back to the main motion. It's restated, discussion continues. But in my example, suppose instead of saying one road agent is bad enough, suppose somebody said, I think that we should hire a second road agent, but I'd like to amend it and make this person a half-time position. Well, that amendment is then restated by the moderator, so the main motion now reads to hire a second road agent for the town at a half-time salary. It's been seconded, it's been restated, and now the discussion focuses on the motion as amended, not the original motion, but the pros and cons of having an additional half-time road agent. If that discussion wraps up and there's a vote, if that is defeated, it curls right back to the main motion, and at that point it might wrap up, or somebody might offer another amendment, and we go around and around here until we finally go down here to a vote. However, and this is where sometimes people think Robert's Rules is arcane, but it's simply an efficient way for 140 people to try to fine-tune something. I've seen this happen in my day as at RTM with select board salaries, with how we handle solid waste. Many issues have gone through this process. During the discussion of the amendment, somebody could offer an amendment to the amendment. The good news is that is as far as it can go. You cannot amend the amendment of the amendment. You can only go 2 degrees from the main motion. In my example, suppose somebody said, I would like to amend the amendment that will hire someone at half-time, but will pay them with firewood off the town woodlot. Now, it's possible that the moderator might rule that how we pay them is not germane to the roads. And I'm not going to weigh in on that. I'm just going to leave it as an example. That discussion to further save the town cash by paying this half-time road agent firewood off the town woodlot, if it's seconded, that then becomes the conversation. If it's passed, we go back to whether we want to hire a second road agent, half-time, paid with firewood. That goes up or down. If it's defeated, we go back to the main motion. If it's accepted, the main motion is now to hire a second road agent, half-time, paid for with hardwood off the town woodlot. However, if nobody seconds that harebrained notion of paying somebody with firewood, then it dies right there. And we go back to the current amendment, etc. So I hope that this visual shows you that it is manageable. Now, a very important topic that I want to make, I'm going to take this moment right now to clarify. And I learned this by reading the Vermont Town Moderator Manual, which is a resource that's available. In Vermont, a warned article cannot be amended in such a way that it raises an issue that was not properly warned. So, for example, if the motion was to hire a second road agent and someone said, I would like to amend that we take that salary for that second road agent and we build an addition on the town hall instead. That's a different issue that has not been warned, and the moderator will stop that and say, we need to have an amendment that is germane to the main motion, because it would actually be a violation of state law to introduce an amendment that was essentially an unwarned article for a different activity that had not been warned. Now, this is why at town meeting we often talk about money, because if we want the budget to do something, we want to amend the budget, we cannot force the select board to spend money in a way, but we can offer more money to the total budget because the budget has been warned, and adding an X number of dollars or cutting X number of dollars can be done on the floor of RTM without interfering with state law. And in Brattleboro, the custom has been, in my day, that the select board listens to the will of RTM. And there may be examples of not, but I think I've even heard select board chairs say, we've heard RTM, we'll use the extra money in this way, or the budget has been cut, we will not pursue that course of action. That can't be promised because we can't actually tell them how to spend the money, but we have reasonable people in Brattleboro. I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to leave this on the here on the screen, and we're going to see if we have any questions thus far. Please use your hand raising if you want to add something, a comment, or ask a question about how I've explained this. And Millicent will unmute you. Any hands raised? Okay, I've tried to be as clear as a bell. Maybe I'm succeeding for the first time in my life. Oh, Bob Ozier. Okay, Bob, what have you got?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So this may or may not be an unfair question, but it came up the other day at the informational meeting, and it may impact on the question of tradition and custom. So there's one article at least that we have that's on the warning, which lists discrete amounts of money, that there will be certain amounts of money provided to a number of actors for certain reasons. And that all came out of the Human Services Committee. Mm-hmm. And there's some tradition about how the Human Services Committee got started, and that it was so that it wouldn't be a floor discussion of particular dollar amounts, but that they would do the homework and present the warned article, which the RTM could decide. One of the persons attending the information session said, but if there's an amount of money in an article, then that amount can be changed. And I think the retort to that was, yes, but the Human Services Committee is a totally different animal, and we would not do it on that particular article. So I don't know if it's an unfair question because it may call for an opinion, but it sounds like it's an example of where tradition may impact how one deals with an amendment of a certain article. And if you wish to answer that, you may.
I'll take a stab at it, and then I see that Franz Reichmann may have an opinion or a comment as well on this topic or another one, Franz. But I will simply say this: that goes a little beyond Robert's rules, and it does entwine with, I believe, yes, local custom, and it also deals with some state law issues, perhaps. I believe that last year we did some across-the-board increase because the body has been wanting to have direction in what is the total human services budget. And that's an addition this year that we will be setting the amount for that budget for next year. And this is to help give guidance from the RTM to the Human Services Committee. I have been at meetings where we literally went down line item and individual amounts or people that missed the deadline for their organization came to RTM and tried to get on board the train, even though there were deadlines publicly and fairly advertised for this part of our, I would say, local culture of giving. And it's very time consuming for 140 people to do that. In 2020, with the onset of COVID, there was a strong sentiment in RTM to increase the human services budget. And I believe it was increased by a percentage across the board that went to all of the groups, according to that formula, that algorithm. It went up by a certain number of percentage, and everybody's grant went up by that amount. So that's all I'm going to say, because I'm sort of basing it on trying to give some background on that. It's not technically a part of Robert's rules. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope that shed a little bit of light, Bob. Let's go to Franz and see what Franz wants to add in there.
Hi, thank you, Andy, and thanks, Bob, for raising this issue. I am assuming that I'm unmuted successfully at this point. Is that true? Okay, great. So I raised this question the other night originally, and what I learned was that with regard to the Human Services Review Committee, the procedure is different from any other article that may come up. What the town attorney said was that, well, first of all, David Gartenstein said, and then the town attorney joined in and said that town meeting itself, representative town meeting itself, in order to enable the Human Services Review Committee to do its work effectively, said that once those numerical values are in the article, they can't be changed. Okay. Now, that was because the whole purpose of that committee was to set these values so that they would not have to be debated during representative town meeting by the body as a whole. So the creation of the committee was conditioned on not having those numbers questioned in that article. However, in any other article where a number appears, then that number can be changed by an amendment. What that doesn't permit us to do is to change numbers that don't appear in the article. For example, particular items in the budget. We can change the total amount of the budget, but we can't change the specific items in the budget. That's up for this to the select board to do. That's, that gets talked about just about every year. So I guess what it boils down to is that for most articles, if a number appears, we can change it if it appears in the article. In the Human Services Review Committee article, their budget article, those numbers cannot be changed individually, but there will be mechanisms in play to change the total amount, as Andy described. So I hope I didn't confuse things more with that ramble, but that's what I learned at the informational meeting.
Thank you, Franz. And I think there will be definitely more questions about that and more clarification at RTM. I'll add one more footnote on that. Is I know that it was articulated at the 2020 meeting when people were saying, well, we have this committee who's done the work, so we shouldn't be second guessing the committee. And it's a fair point. There were some people who felt and expressed that this was turning RTM into a kind of rubber stamp of the committee. But I would just offer that in Robert's rules, the establishment of committees by a body is part of our power as a body. And we're not really rubber stamping. We actually created that committee in order to function better as a representative town meeting. So I do think that we made those changes in 2020 because there was so much need, so much dislocation, and so much unknown around the pandemic. But I think what came out of it was this idea of each year, and you'll see we have an article this year to set the Human Services total budget by act of RTM. And that was a little vague in past years how much money was actually in that available to that committee. So that might add some clarification. Thank you, Franz. Thank you, Bob. Is there any other question out there on in the meeting tonight about this process of amendments? That certainly was germane because it has to do with this process of amendment. It is in the purview of the moderator to rule that an amendment or an amendment of an amendment is not germane. And that has happened often, and it's also within the power of a member of the body to question the judgment of the moderator and have the body vote on it. Another way to look at Robert's rules is a set of checks and balances, and that's a very American thing in our democracy, that we have opportunities for individuals to question, but it always goes back to a decision made by the group in some manner, and there's a system of overlapping processes that we adhere to. Okay, if there's no further questions, Millicent, do you see anything? I'm going to go to my next visual here, and this one is not designed to scare you, and I'm going to first give a couple of real disqualifications of this document, which I created. It is signed at the bottom. I take full responsibility for it. If you look at the bottom, prepared March 2022 by Andy Davis for use with representative town meeting. Andy Davis is a District 3 representative. My email address is there if you have questions, and the date of this current version of it. I began with there are many reference guides for Robert's Rules on the internet, published in books. I've referenced the books that you can get right here in town, and there's many other ones. There are many versions of Robert's Rules. There's a thing called convention rules. Often a group of maybe 1,000 delegates of a labor union will get together and they will put forth the rules for the convention, which are different than the rules that might happen in an executive committee meeting or a committee meeting or a representative town meeting. But what this is these are some of the bedrock motions that are available to members of a deliberative body making use of parliamentary procedure or Robert's Rules. And I'm not going to go over this line by line. There are three basic kinds of motions that happen in a meeting. If you look at the three are privileged motions, which have to do with the meeting and the agenda. And many of these motions, they take precedence over the work of the meeting. So in other words, you can even interrupt to make sure that the agenda is being followed, for example. So here, what do you want to do is the first column. The second column, what do you say? And the third column was my way of making it a little friendlier to just provide a little prose, notes explaining. Some of the charts have all these different columns here for can you interrupt, does it need a second? I decided that after these two columns, just a little of plain English would be the most helpful. This is not something you want to memorize. It's something you might learn over time. But it's a reference guide only, a reference guide. So if you're at the meeting on Saturday, third Saturday of March, and you think we need to take a break because nature is calling, you can get in the queue by being acknowledged. You can say, I move we take a recess. It needs to be seconded. There can be an amendment. The moderator sometimes suggests that amount of time or something. There needs to be a majority vote, and then we take a recess. That's how my chart works. These are the privileged motions. The second category of motions are called incidental motions. And they have to do with incidents or specific requests, specific appeals, specific inquiries relating to business that's on the floor at that moment. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, if what you want to do is appeal a decision of the moderator has ruled an amendment non-germane, and you maybe feel like that was not perhaps correct, you can, in a live meeting, interrupt. And I don't know, maybe David, if he's still, would comment on how we might be handling that. All I'm going to say in this training is that electronic meetings have to be adjusted because of the technology. But I'm going to say right now that at a live meeting, the next time we're meeting in person, you can say, I appeal the decision of the moderator. You need a second to do that. There can be debate. A majority vote is needed. If it's a tie vote, the decision of the moderator stands. So this is an attempt to just, again, incidental motions. These are the different things you might want to do. You might want to request information. You might want to make sure rules are being followed. You might want to reconsider a vote that just finished. In Vermont, if another piece of business has not been taken up, as long as you're adhering to Vermont law, you can request that a vote be reconsidered. Okay? This is simply a reference guide. This is another one that came up, and I'll just spend a moment on it because this has come up at RTM in my time. If you want to suspend the rules, this sort of process of motions and articles and amendments and votes, you can get recognized by the moderator. You can't interrupt to do this, but you can suggest to the body by saying, I move to suspend the rules in order to. And at that point, you might say, I think we should give everybody, instead of the usual time limit, I think it currently stands at 2 or 3 minutes to speak. Our moderator will remind us of that at the next RTM. You could suggest that the speaker time limits are changed, lengthened or shortened. You might say, I think we should just turn the whole body into a committee meeting and have a free-form discussion where anybody can speak. You might say, I want to suspend the rules so we can debate 2 alternative motions, 2 different courses of direction the town might want to take on a particular issue. To change the rules or suspend the normal rules, you do need to have a second. However, no debate or amendments. It's what the person suggests. If it's seconded, there's an up or down vote that requires a 2/3 majority. Anytime we vote in such a way that changes the ability for people to express themselves, it always requires a 2/3 majority. And we'll get into that in a moment with the third subject. But I see David Gartenstein's hand is up, and I'm going to suspend our customary rules, Millicent, and call on David at this moment, because I'm hoping he will offer some light on the issue perhaps of incidental motions and privileged motions in an electronic meeting. Say whatever you want, David.
Thanks, Andy. I'm not going to speak for long. It is our intention to try to allow privileged motions where we would be able to interrupt at an in-person meeting using the chat function. So the chat function will only be enabled to the host of the meeting, and we hope to be able to track that separate from the raise hand function. And if it's working effectively, I can't promise it's going to work, but if it's working effectively, we will try to track those requests to interrupt and to allow people to do so.
Beautiful. Thank you, David, for making that effort. Sometimes a point of information is really good. There would be a lot of discussion on a topic, and a piece of information that somebody once clarified, actually, this is why that can take precedence, because adding that piece of information helps the debate. And if somebody is like 12th in line to speak, the question could even be called before they had a chance to bring this piece of information forward. So as you delve into Robert's rules, you'll see that there's a real logic to them. This is the one I just referred to. If what you want to do is request information, you want to interrogate the town attorney or interrogate a member of the select board or the head of the finance committee, you can interrupt to request information. The moderator then will turn and say to the individual, you are being requested to provide a certain piece of information. And you don't need to have a second on that or voted. You can simply ask for information. And the logic of that is that will help move the debate forward and make the discussion more complete. Now, this is kind of what we've been talking about, and the reason they're down at the bottom, even though these all have to do with what we've been talking about tonight. Subsidiary motions are the motions that assist in putting forth, debating, amending, and disposing of main motions. By disposing of, I mean moving through them, voting them up or down, or, disposing of them. All of these motions support that process. The reason they're down at the bottom, even though they seem like the main purpose of the meeting, is that these motions take precedence over them. These motions can happen while these are in operation. That's why they're put up at the top, okay? So all of these have to do with articles or motions. If you want to set aside, suppose we've gone till 1:30 without a lunch break, you could move to lay the question on the table to after lunch or 2 o'clock or whatever. This is a famous one that comes up every year and has various interesting customs and feelings about it. This is if what you want to do is end or close the debate on an article. It's technically called moving the previous question. We often call it in Brattleboro, call the question, and you can do that. I believe, yes, you have to be recognized. You cannot interrupt to do this. And one thing you cannot do is speak to the matter and then call the question. And the pretty obvious logic of that. You can't unload your opinion and then say, I think we should stop talking now. So if you get recognized to close debate, that's the only thing you do when you're called upon. And again, because it has the power to limit people's right to speak, it requires a 2/3 majority to be passed. All right, I'm going to go back to David because you're such a great resource and I'm glad you're here. David. If you don't know
Well,
David, there might be one or two people here that have been living in the woods or something. David is our moderator elect for the upcoming meeting. Thank you for being here, David.
I think I just neglected to take my hand down.
Oh, well, now
Sorry.
you have a big moment to throw in an extra speech.
Well, have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, David. I'm about to wrap up here because we're at 7:26. So those are our motions. The last thing that I want to say to just end this, and this is under the category of leaving the best to last, and I referred to this earlier in the meeting. That what really makes our process go is not solely Robert's rules, not solely state law, not solely the town charter, but skills, not only that the leadership provides, because everybody who is a representative at this meeting can show leadership. And we all have examples of somebody providing clarity during a debate. That's a form of skilled leadership. Our elected officials often show great skilled leadership. They often have more knowledge on an issue because they've been closer to it over the process, and they step up with that. We have our customs and our traditions, civility and respect at all times to one another. Some of the smaller towns will have potluck suppers and such where people that fiercely debate an issue in the morning are seen having lunch together and talking about their children and talking about the future of the town, even though they spent the morning arguing two diametrically opposed directions on a particular article. The simple act of paying attention is one of the great engines of our the reason why Robert's Rules has calling the question. It says right in the volume, when the debate has become repetitive or circular. And sometimes it becomes repetitive because people, instead of paying attention to others, are preparing their notes for when they speak. And they don't notice that those points have been made. That has happened. Listening to one another. I play a little game sometimes myself. I have things I want to say, but I listen to others carefully, and if I hear my points made, I go, great, I don't have to raise my hand. Somebody more clear than me made my point. They made it well. I don't need to hear myself talk. Preparation, reading through the warnings, at least flipping through the town report and familiarizing yourself with some, things, and maybe finding a little list of questions that you might have before the meeting. And of course, taking some notes during. I think I'm going to simply end with a quick reading, and then we'll see if anyone has questions or wants to stick around. But a number of years ago, Jane Southworth, who I don't know if she's currently an RTM member, but she wrote a lovely convocation for the beginning of town meeting, and I have one paragraph I want to read to end my presentation. This was in the place of a member of one of our religious societies getting up and giving a prayer. It was a kind of civic prayer, a kind of just what do we believe as citizens. And this was my favorite paragraph in her longer convocation. We are here because we care about our town, because we believe in being a responsible part of it, and because we care how our government works for the rest of us. The quality of our governance will depend on the personal quality of our work with one another. I have been impressed by the preparation of the members, by our ability to listen to each other, both things said and things unsaid, to care, to be concerned and accepting, to give thoughtful speeches, and to be patient listeners. And then she paraphrased the great Walt Kelly, who produced Pogo for many years. She says, "We have met the government, and it is us." If anyone has a comment or a question, I'm going to stop talking. We got in here just under an hour. We'll take free-form comments or questions relating to the use of Robert's rules and the way our town works here. Yes, we have somebody here. Introduce yourself if you will, because I can't remember who has the name owner here today.
Okay, I got myself unmuted. Bob Tortolani.
Oh, Bob, great.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Andy, I think this was excellent, and I thank you for your hard work in putting this together. And I think that groupings of those various actions is terrific. I actually have not seen anything quite like that before. The only question I have has to do with calling the question. And as I recall, both sides of an issue have to be at least discussed, the negative and the positive, before the question can be called. I think that is I just wanted to bring that up.
That's a really good point. And in Robert's rules, there is advice to the moderator to, if positions are known on a contentious issue, to try to call as much as the moderator may know. The moderator may not know how everybody in the room feels, but to make at least an effort to call and get a variety of points. Bob, I think your comment is really well taken. I think it would be considered very inappropriate and sort of a waste of time if somebody spoke and then the next person got up and called the question. I think that it would be impossible to get 2/3 because I think most people would say, what? We haven't even started the conversation on this. There's so much more to say. Right. And it's also related to why you can't unload your opinion and then finish by calling the question. But it's a point really well taken, and I trust that our moderator and the body understands that that would be in that category of using Robert's rules to hinder the work of the body and not pull it forward, to try to limit debate before the debate had really gotten started. But it's an excellent point. And that's a good yardstick. Have both sides been heard? So thank you. Anything else, Bob? That's a really good point. Beth Kindle has her hand up here. Oh, I did want to say before, while you're unmuting, Beth, that document, Bob, and everyone, is also in that folder. If you go to brattleboro.org, which is our town website, and you go to Representative Town Meeting, in the right-hand column, there is a folder called Resources, and you will see the Roberts Rules reference chart is available there as a PDF. You can download it as a document or print it out, or you can write me at my email and I'll send you a copy if you have trouble with the town website. Okay, Beth Kendall, anything you would like to offer?
Andy, this all has all been great. I was just listening and I retract my question because you just answered it about the availability of those charts. So thanks a lot.
Yep, write me to my email address, andy@dancingmasters.com, or go to the town website, or I believe that the town clerk could even direct you to it.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Beth. Franz Reichman.
Hi, thanks, Andy. And thanks to Bob Tortolani for bringing up the point that he made. I just want to pile on by reminding people, or maybe people don't know or don't remember, but town meeting, I believe it was last year, pretty sure. A motion was made under other business. There was no debate. Someone moved the question and that motion passed. And the main motion then was passed without any discussion on either side. There was one comment made, we're all in favor of this, by the person who actually called the question. So it was, I think, not handled properly from a parliamentary perspective. And I think it's really good that Bob brings that up as an issue, because indeed it did take place at our, I think it was last year's representative town meeting.
Bob, I'm gonna, if there's anyone else who has something to say, I know that Robert's Rules talks about the reason, the purpose is clearly stated in Robert's Rules for calling the question when the discussion has become repetitive or circular. Calling the question before discussion has happened certainly does, something that hasn't happened cannot be circular or repetitive. And I think that maybe that's one of the purposes of these trainings. It's also something that can, many town moderators actually give some guidelines at the outset of the meeting, and that's at the discretion of the moderator. So David, perhaps you might think of some articulate words to say that calling the question before there's been a fair amount of debate is really not recommended. I do know, and I don't think it's inappropriate to say, that there are people who believe almost as an article of faith that the question should not be called. That as long as an individual has something to say, they should be allowed to say it. And nobody should leave the meeting feeling like I had something important to say. Because I know that you'll see certain people that that just very regularly vote against ending debate. And I one year went up and asked someone, you always vote against ending debate. And they said, well, there's something to be said. Maybe somebody has the really perfect thing to say to add to the argument that we're having here, and it might be better to let the conversation go on for another 10 minutes and get that information and that viewpoint. So it is key to the whole question, as I said at the beginning, that our main purpose is a fair and efficient way to hear all sides before cutting loose majority rule. So that's that's right at the core of what we're trying to do here, is hear all points of view. Anything else, Franz? Your hand is still up, so you can keep going if you wish. If Millicent will unmute you. I think his hand is down. I think at 7:38, this is last call before I make a motion to adjourn. Not that we're following Robert's Rules at all tonight, but last call for questions or comments. I want to again thank Millicent for helping so much with the publicity on this. And feel free to reach out to me, andy@dancingmasters.com, if you want to ask a question or clarify something or improve this training by making a point of something I perhaps would be wise to include. Because I'd actually enjoyed preparing this and hope to do it again. So with that, have a pleasant evening. We'll see you, many of you, at Representative Town Meeting. Thank you. And good night.